Are you all right? Oh, thank God. Are you hurt anywhere?
She almost didn't stop. That was the thought that would haunt Naomi Carter for the rest of her life, that she had been 3 seconds away from driving past him. 3 seconds away from turning up her heat, pulling her coat tighter, and telling herself that whatever she saw in that ditch wasn't her problem. But she stopped, and nothing was ever the same after that. It was the kind of night that made Chicago feel like a punishment. January at its cruelest, not the glamorous snowfall that looked beautiful on Christmas cards, but the brutal, relentless kind that turned sidewalks into ice traps and killed car batteries and left no mercy for anything that breathed. The wind off Lake Michigan had teeth. It bit through Naomi's uniform, coat the moment she stepped outside St. Augustine's Hospital at 11:47 p.m., reaching through the fabric like it had a personal grievance with her. 12 hours on her feet, 12 hours on the pediatric ward, holding hands through fevers and IV placements and one terrifying code that had ended, mercifully, with a child still breathing. Her scrubs were damp at the collar. Her lower back throbbed in 2 specific places that no amount of ibuprofen would reach. She had leftover jollof rice waiting in her fridge, a cup of tea she was already promising herself, and exactly enough energy left to drive the 8 minutes home without crying. She wasn't supposed to be on the highway. The 290 was usually faster, but the traffic report had mentioned a 3-car pileup near the Austin exit, so she'd taken the back route, the long, dark stretch of road that cut through the industrial edge of the city, where the streetlights were sparse, and the buildings were the kind that didn't have names on them. She knew this area the way every Black woman in Chicago knew certain areas, with awareness, with her doors locked, and without stopping unless absolutely necessary. She was doing 55 when her headlights swept the ditch. She saw the shape first, small, huddled, half buried in a snowbank that had built up against the guardrail. Her brain processed it the way a tired mind processes things, slowly, skeptically, searching for the rational explanation. A bag of garbage, a bundle of discarded clothing. An animal, maybe, though it was too large and too still in the wrong way. She hit her brakes. The car fishtailed slightly on the icy asphalt before steadying. She pulled to the shoulder, hazards blinking orange into the dark, and sat there for 3 full seconds with her hands gripping the wheel. Every self-preservation instinct she owned told her this could be anything. A setup. A trap. A situation that would spiral into something she was not equipped to handle alone on an empty road at midnight. She got out of the car. The cold hit her like a wall. Her breath turned to cloud instantly. She jogged toward the ditch, her sneakers punching through the top crust of snow, and when she got close enough for her headlights to reach, she dropped to her knees without thinking. It was a child. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, though the cold had done something to his features that made it hard to tell. He was curled into himself, arms tucked against his chest, knees drawn up, the textbook position of a body trying to conserve heat that it no longer had enough of. He was wearing a dark coat, good quality, she noticed distantly, with silver buttons and a collar that someone had clearly turned up around his ears before this started. But it wasn't enough. It was nowhere near enough for 3 hours in this kind of cold, and Naomi's nurse's eye told her immediately that he'd been here for at least that long. His lips were bluish-gray. "Hey," she touched his cheek, cold, too cold. "Hey, baby, open your eyes for me." Nothing. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, found the pulse, weak, thready, too slow. Her training clicked on like a switch, clean and mechanical, overriding the panic trying to claw its way up her throat. Hypothermia, moderate to severe, core temperature dropping. Needs warmth, needs hospital, needs this to happen in the next 90 seconds. She got her arms under him. He was small, but solid, heavier than she expected, and completely unconscious as she lifted him. She carried him to the car, yanked open the back door, laid him across the seat. Her hands moved on autopilot, heat dialed to maximum, vents redirected to the back, her coat stripped off and wrapped around him because her scrubs could handle the cold longer than he could. She was back behind the wheel in under a minute, already pulling out her phone to call ahead to St. Augustine's emergency line, when she noticed the car. Parked on the opposite shoulder. Dark, no headlights. A black SUV, one of the long, reinforced kinds that didn't belong to ordinary people. 3 men stood beside it. They weren't dressed for the weather. Black coats, gloved hands, and the kind of stillness that men only learned in one of 2 places, the military, or somewhere far more dangerous. They were staring at her car, staring with the focused, assessing calm of people who were deciding something. Naomi's heart dropped straight through the floor of the vehicle. She pulled out of the shoulder fast, faster than was safe on ice, and she didn't look in her rearview mirror until she was 2 blocks away. When she did, the SUV hadn't moved. But one of the men had his phone to his ear. She drove. She called ahead. She focused on the boy's breathing, which was shallow but present, and told herself that whatever those men were, whatever that child was caught up in, her only job right now was keeping him alive long enough to get him through the emergency room doors. She was 3 blocks from the hospital when the boy's eyes opened. Dark, impossibly dark, quiet in a way that no child's eyes should be. He looked at her through the rearview mirror and said nothing, just looked, with an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't confusion, it was something older. Something that had already decided, in some wordless calculation, whether or not she could be trusted. Then he said, in English that was accented and precise, "Don't tell them where you found me." Naomi's hands tightened on the wheel. "Who?" she asked. The boy closed his eyes again. She pulled into the hospital bay 30 seconds later, and the whole way through triage, through the warming protocol, through the questions from the overnight attending who wanted to know where she'd found him and who his parents were, Naomi kept her mouth moving on autopilot while one thought circled the inside of her mind like smoke. Don't tell them where you found me. Them's not the people looking for me, not anyone. Them. As if he knew exactly who would come. It was 2:04 in the morning when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Chicago area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. She was sitting in the hallway outside the pediatric bay, still in her scrubs, too wound up to leave and too tired to think clearly. She answered. The voice on the other end was male. Low. Korean accented, each word placed with the kind of deliberate precision that had nothing to do with language barriers. Everything to do with a man who chose his words the way other men chose weapons. You found something tonight that belongs to me, he said. Not a question. Naomi's whole body went cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the January air. Who is this? She managed. A pause, then, someone who would like to speak with you in person. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. Naomi sat perfectly still in that hospital hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the sounds of the overnight ward muffled behind closed doors. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Somewhere in the room behind her, the boy with the dark, too old eyes was being warmed back to life. And in 20 minutes, the most dangerous man in the city was going to walk through those doors. And Naomi Carter, pediatric nurse, daughter of immigrants, woman who stopped for strangers in the snow because her mother had raised her that way. She had no idea what she had just saved. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because this story is just getting started, and you do not want to miss what walks through those doors. He arrived in 19 minutes. Naomi knew because she watched the clock. She sat in that hallway chair with her phone face down on her knee and her back straight, and her hands folded in her lap the way her mother had taught her to sit when she needed to look calmer than she felt. Every minute that ticked past felt like a countdown to something she didn't have a name for yet. At 2:23 a.m., the emergency bay doors opened. She felt him before she saw him. That was the only way she could describe it later, a shift in the atmosphere of the room. The way air pressure changes before a storm rolls in off the lake. The overnight security guard at the reception desk looked up from his phone. The nurse at the station lifted her head. Even the orderly pushing an empty gurney down the far corridor slowed without seeming to realize he'd done it. Then he walked in, and Naomi understood why. He was tall not ostentatiously so, but tall in the way that claimed space that made hallways feel narrower. He wore a black wool coat, floor-length, unbuttoned, moving with him like a shadow. Beneath it, a dark suit, no tie, the collar open at the throat. His hands were in his pockets. His face was still. That was the word. Not calm in the way that tired people were calm, or in the way that bored people were calm. Still in the way that water is still just before something moves beneath it. He was perhaps mid-30s, Korean, with the kind of sharp-planed face that looked as though it had been designed with a specific purpose in mind. High forehead. Dark eyes that moved through the room in one smooth pass, cataloging, weighing, filing. They landed on her. He walked toward her without hesitation, as though he had known exactly where she'd be. Two men followed 3 steps behind him. Large, silent. They stopped when he stopped, which was 6 feet in front of Naomi. She stood. She wasn't sure why. Some instinct that decided standing was better than being looked down upon. He studied her for a moment, not rudely, not warmly, the way a man studies a contract before deciding whether to sign it. Naomi Carter, he said. Not a question. He already knew her name. You have me at a disadvantage, she said, and was quietly proud that her voice came out level. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not quite a reaction, the ghost of one. Park Sejun, he said. He didn't offer his hand. The boy is my nephew. His name is Junho. Naomi held his gaze. He's stable. His core temperature was dangerously low when I brought him in. Another 30 minutes in that cold and the outcome would have been different. I know, a pause. I'm told you carried him to your car yourself. He was unconscious, yes. And you called ahead to the emergency team before you arrived. I'm a nurse. It's what you do. He looked at her for another moment in that particular way he had, like he was reading something written in a language most people couldn't see. What else did you do? He asked quietly. Naomi understood the question. It wasn't about the medical protocol. It was about the men on the shoulder of the road, about whether she'd called anyone else, about what she knew and who she'd told. Nothing, she said. I brought him in. I stayed to make sure he was stable, that's all. You didn't call the police. I called the hospital. That's not what I asked. She met his eyes directly. No, I didn't call the police. Again that almost reaction. He turned his head slightly, said something low in Korean to the man on his left. The man nodded once and moved toward the nurse's station. The other stayed exactly where he was, watching Naomi with the practiced blankness of someone paid to observe and say nothing. Park Sejun looked back at her. Junho said something to you, he said, in the car. It wasn't a question either. The boy must have told him, or he'd simply assumed, and the fact that he'd assumed correctly told her something about how well he knew the child. He told me not to say where I found him, Naomi said, to anyone. And you honored that. He was a scared child asking me for something simple, so yes. The stillness in his face shifted again. This time she caught it more clearly. Something moved behind his eyes, not softness, exactly. Recognition, maybe. Like she had said the right answer to a question she hadn't known she was being tested on. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a card. Plain matte black, no logo, just a number in clean silver print. He held it out. She took it. When the attending physician asks questions about the boy's identity, he said, you'll tell them his name is Lee Junho, age 7, allergic to penicillin, no other medical history of note. His paperwork will be handled. Naomi looked at the card, then at him. Handled. Yes. You want me to manage the questions. I want you to answer them accurately with the information I've just given you. That's not the same as lying. No, he agreed. It isn't. She should have pushed back. She should have asked why a 7-year-old boy had been alone on an industrial road at midnight in below-freezing temperatures. She should have asked what those 3 men on the shoulder were doing there, why they hadn't been the ones to pull him out of the snowbank, why the child's first conscious words had been a warning rather than a cry for help. She asked none of it. Not because she was afraid, though she was, somewhere underneath the adrenaline, But because she understood, with the particular clarity that exhaustion sometimes brings, that this was not the moment for those questions. That this man would not answer them here, in a hospital hallway, under fluorescent lights, with an overnight orderly 20 feet away pretending not to listen. She pocketed the card. "His temperature is stabilizing," she said instead. "They'll keep him overnight. He needs rest and fluids. He should be discharged by tomorrow evening." Park Sejun nodded once. "Will you be here?" "My shift starts at 7. Then I'll return at 7. He said it simply, without negotiation, like an arrangement that had already been decided and merely needed to be stated aloud. He held her gaze for one more beat, 2 seconds, 3, and then turned and walked back toward the emergency bay doors. His men followed. The orderly down the corridor started moving again. The security guard looked back at his phone. The room exhaled. Naomi stood alone in the hallway. She looked down at the matte black card in her palm. No name on it, just the number. She thought about the boy's eyes in the rearview mirror. Dark and too old and already calculating trust. She thought about the 3 men on the shoulder road who hadn't moved to help him, who had let him lie in a snowbank and freeze while they stood 10 feet away in the dark. She thought about Park Sejun's voice, low, even, unmoved, saying his paperwork will be handled with the casual certainty of a man who had spent his entire life making problems disappear before they became problems. She thought about all the sensible, self-preserving things she should do right now. Then she went back inside to check on Junho's temperature. He was awake when she pushed through the door, sitting up against the pillows with an IV in the back of his small hand and a warming blanket tucked to his chin, looking at the door like he'd been expecting her specifically. His color was better. The gray had lifted. His eyes, up close and in proper light, were extraordinary, pitch-dark, wide-set, with the kind of watchful intelligence that made adults instinctively take him more seriously than his age suggested. He looked at her and said nothing. "Your uncle was here," she said, pulling up the chair beside his bed. "I know," a pause. "Did he scare you?" Naomi considered the question honestly. "A little," she admitted. "Did he scare you?" Junho thought about this, genuinely thought about it, in the way children do when they decide to take a question seriously. "No," he said. "Uncle Sejun doesn't scare me. He's the only person who doesn't." Naomi looked at this 7-year-old boy with his IV and his warming blanket and his ancient eyes, and felt something tighten in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "Go to sleep," she said quietly. "You're safe tonight." He studied her for a moment the same way his uncle had. The family resemblance was suddenly, startlingly clear. Then he nodded, lay back and closed his eyes. Naomi sat in the chair beside him until his breathing deepened and steadied. Outside, somewhere in the January dark, a black SUV sat in the hospital parking lot. She was almost certain of it. She didn't go to check. She already knew. She didn't sleep. Naomi went home at 3:15, stood in her shower until the hot water ran out, ate 4 spoonfuls of cold jollof rice standing over the sink, and lay down on her bed fully dressed. She stared at the ceiling for 2 hours while the radiator clicked and the wind threw itself against her window, and the matte black card sat on her nightstand like a lit match. She was back at the hospital by 6:40. She told herself it was professionalism. She told herself she always came in early when she had a patient to check on. She told herself a lot of things during the 8-minute drive, and none of them were entirely untrue, which made them easier to believe. Junho was awake when she arrived. He had been moved from the emergency bay to a private room on the pediatric floor, a room that Naomi was certain had not been available at 2 in the morning and was now mysteriously unoccupied, except for one small Korean boy eating hospital oatmeal with the resigned expression of someone who had expected better. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up, recognized her. The resigned expression didn't change, but something in his eyes settled slightly, the way a room settles when a familiar person walks in. "The oatmeal is terrible," he informed her. "It always is." She came in, checked his chart, checked the IV line, checked his temperature, 97.8, almost normal. How do you feel? Warmer. That's the goal. She made a note, hung the chart back. Junho, can I ask you something? He considered her over his spoon. You can ask. How did you end up on that road? He ate another spoonful of oatmeal. Chewed. Swallowed. She was realizing, extraordinarily composed for a 7-year-old. Not in a suppressed way, not in the way of a child who had been frightened into stillness. In the way of a child who had been taught, carefully, deliberately, that composure was a form of power. I was taken from my uncle's car, he said finally. 3 men, they put something over my face. When I woke up, I was in the ditch. He said it with the flatness of a report, each sentence a fact to be documented rather than a trauma to be felt. I didn't know where I was. I started walking. My hands stopped working after a while. Naomi kept her face neutral, through a decade of nursing discipline. Did you see the men? She asked. Yes. Would you recognize them? Yes, a pause. My uncle will handle it. My uncle will handle it. Said the way other 7-year-olds said asterisk, my mom already signed the permission slip. Easy. Absolute. Built on a foundation of evidence so solid it required no explanation. Naomi nodded slowly. Okay. Junho looked at her. You're not going to tell me to go to the police. Would it help if I did? He returned to his oatmeal. No. She believed him. She left him to finish breakfast and was 2 steps into the hallway when she walked directly into Park Sejun's chest. She stumbled back. His hand came up quick, automatic, and caught her arm just below the elbow, steadied her, released her in the same motion as though the contact had been a reflex he immediately contained. I said 7, he said. It's 6:50, she straightened her badge. I came early. He looked at her with that still, reading expression. He was dressed differently than last night, charcoal trousers, a dark cashmere sweater, no coat this time, which meant he'd come from somewhere nearby and warm. His sleeves were pushed up slightly at the wrists. She caught the edge of something dark at his forearm, intricate, disappearing beneath the fabric before she looked away. He ate breakfast, she said. Temperature is nearly normal. The attending wants to keep him until this afternoon for observation, then he can be discharged. This afternoon. Standard protocol for hypothermia recovery. It's not negotiable. Something that might have been the very beginning of amusement crossed his face and vanished. I wasn't going to negotiate, he said. He moved past her into the room. She should have continued down the hallway. She had other patients, other charts, a morning briefing in 11 minutes. Instead, she stood in the doorway and watched. Junho looked up when his uncle entered, and something happened to the boy's face that Naomi had not seen yet. A loosening, a drop of the careful composure, something young and genuine rising up underneath it. Not quite a smile, something quieter. The specific relief of a child who has been frightened for a long time and can now, for this moment, stop being frightened. Park Sejun crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and put his hand on top of Junho's head. Just that. He said something low in Korean, 2 or 3 words, and Junho responded, and whatever passed between them was entirely private. Naomi looked away. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard footsteps behind her. Even, unhurried, she didn't turn around. Nurse Carter. She stopped, turned. He stood 6 feet away, hands back in his pockets, the morning gray of the window at the end of the corridor casting flat light across his face. Last night, he said, on the road you saw my men. It wasn't a question. She had expected this. I saw a black SUV, she said carefully, and 3 men standing beside it. They were guarding a perimeter. Junho's disappearance was recent. We were searching a grid. His voice was even, informational. By the time we located the road, you were already driving away. Naomi absorbed this. Why didn't they stop me, check the car? They did consider it. A pause. I told them not to. She looked at him. You told them. How did you even know about me yet? One of them ran your plates and called me. I told them to let you go. He held her gaze steadily. You were a nurse who had just pulled a child out of a snowbank. I made a judgment. About me. Yes. She thought about that, about being assessed from a distance at midnight by a man she'd never met and being found trustworthy enough, perhaps, safe enough. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. You were watching before you ever walked into this hospital, she said. I'm always watching, he said, simply, without apology. She believed that too. She crossed her arms. It was a posture she used with difficult family members and overconfident doctors. It didn't appear to register on him whatsoever. Junho told me he was taken from your car, she said. Grabbed, left in a ditch in the middle of January. Yes. He's 7 years old. I know how old he is. Then you know that what happened to him last night was, she stopped herself, measured. Someone is willing to use a child to get to you. The quality of his stillness changed. Barely perceptibly, but she caught it. A tightening at the jaw, something that moved behind his eyes like a shadow crossing still water. Yes, he said, I know that. And he goes back to you today, back into whatever situation made that possible. The situation has been addressed. The men. He said nothing, but the nothing was answer enough. Naomi unfolded her arms. She looked at this man, this quiet, contained, unmovable man, and understood something with sudden, uncomfortable clarity. He wasn't indifferent to the boy. The opposite, the hand on Junho's head. The 2 words in Korean that had made a frightened child breathe. The decision made at midnight on a dark road. Let the nurse go. She's safe, I've decided. He was not a man who did not care. He was a man who operated in a world where caring and protecting were not the same thing, and who had spent years learning to be the wall that stood between the two. He's lucky you found him, Park Sejun said. Most people would have driven past. I almost did, she said honestly. He looked at her for a long moment. But you didn't. He walked back toward his nephew's room. She watched him go. Her morning briefing started in 4 minutes. She stood in the corridor a moment longer, turning something over in her mind that she couldn't quite articulate yet. A feeling like standing at the edge of something, not a cliff, not a drop, but a threshold. The kind you could still step back from. For now. She went to her briefing. Junho was discharged at 2:17 in the afternoon. Naomi wasn't supposed to be on that floor anymore. Her rounds had moved to the east wing at noon, 2 corridors and an elevator away, and there was no clinical reason for her to be standing at the nurse's station outside pediatric room 7 when the door opened and Park Sejun walked out with his nephew. She was there anyway. Junho saw her first. He was dressed now, real clothes, dark trousers, and a wool sweater that someone had brought, because it hadn't been there this morning. He was carrying a small drawstring bag and walking with the careful deliberateness of someone whose legs still remembered being cold. When he saw Naomi, he stopped. He crossed to her, without looking at his uncle for permission. Thank you, he said, formal, direct, like a small person who had been taught that gratitude was not a feeling you gestured at but a thing you delivered properly, face to face. Naomi crouched to his eye level. You're welcome. Take care of yourself, Junho. He studied her for a moment with those dark, measuring eyes. Then he said, You should be careful. She blinked. Of what? Of people who know your name before you tell them. He glanced briefly, almost imperceptibly, toward his uncle, then back to her. It means they've already been paying attention. Naomi held very still. Junho nodded once, as though he'd completed a task, and walked toward the elevator. Park Sejun stood a few feet back. He had heard every word. His expression showed nothing. He's perceptive, Naomi said, straightening. He's been told the truth about the world, Sejun replied. Children who understand reality are harder to deceive. And harder to protect. He looked at her. Yes, both. The elevator arrived. Junho stepped in and turned around, hands folded in front of him, waiting. Sejun held Naomi's gaze for one more beat. There's a car outside, he said. Black, parked at the curb closest to the staff exit. She felt her pulse shift. I see. It's not a threat. It's yours for the evening. My driver will take you wherever you need to go. She opened her mouth. "You've been awake for over 30 hours, he said before she could speak. "You drove alone on that road at midnight. You sat with my nephew until he slept. A car is not adequate, but it's what I have to offer today." She closed her mouth. Looked at him. "I have my own car," she said. "It has a slow leak in the rear left tire. It's been losing pressure since approximately 10 this morning." He said it without satisfaction, without showing off. Just information, delivered the way he delivered everything, level, certain, already verified. "The temperature tonight will drop to 4 degrees. I'd rather you didn't find out about the tire on the highway." She stared at him. He walked to the elevator, stepped in beside Junho. The doors began to close. "Mr. Park," she said. The doors paused. He looked at her through the narrowing gap. "How long have you been paying attention?" she asked. The elevator closed. She stood in the corridor for a long moment, alone, with the particular feeling of someone who has just realized that a situation began earlier than they thought, and that what they took for a beginning was already the middle. She checked her rear left tire on her brake. It was almost flat. She took the car. She told herself it was practical. She told herself it was cold, and her tire was flat, and refusing a ride on principle when the alternative was calling roadside assistance at 7 p.m. in January was a kind of pride she couldn't afford. She told herself all of this while climbing into the back of a black Mercedes that smelled like leather and cedar, and something faintly expensive she couldn't name. The driver said nothing, drove smoothly, didn't look at her in the mirror more than once. She was home in 6 minutes. She sat on her couch with a cup of tea and tried to read and managed 4 pages before she gave up and stared at the middle distance instead. The matte black card was still on her nightstand. She'd looked up the number that morning, a reflex she'd been unable to stop herself from acting on, the way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue even knowing it will hurt. No results, of course no results. She thought about Junho in the ditch, his small body curved against the cold, hands tucked, the precise posture of survival. She thought about the 3 men on the shoulder who had not helped him. She thought about the word taken delivered with 7-year-old flatness, and what it meant that a child could describe his own abduction like a scheduling inconvenience. She thought about Park Sejun's hand on the boy's head. 2 words in Korean, the loosening of everything careful in Junho's face. She thought about it means they've already been paying attention. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she knew before she answered. "Are you home?" His voice, low and even through the speaker, like he was already in the room. "Yes," she paused. "Thank you for the car." "The driver will be available tomorrow if you need him." "I have my own transportation." "The tire will be replaced by morning." A pause. "I need to tell you something." She sat up slightly. Something in the quality of his voice had changed. Not in a way most people would catch. But she'd spent 12 hours yesterday reading the difference between fine and not fine, between stable and declining, and she caught it. "The men who took Junho," he said, "they've been identified." She waited. "They know that a nurse found him. They have the hospital name. It won't take significant effort to find your name." Another pause, deliberate, giving her time to absorb each piece separately. "I want you to understand that this is a consequence of a situation you didn't choose and don't deserve." The tea in her hands had gone cold. "Are you telling me I'm in danger?" she said, not a question. "I'm telling you that 3 men who kidnapped a child are aware that you intervened. Whether that becomes danger depends on how the next 48 hours unfold." "And how do you expect them to unfold?" "I expect them to unfold the way I direct them to," he said. "But I don't make promises I can't guarantee, so I'm telling you the truth instead." Naomi set down her cup. She looked at her hands. Steady. They'd been steady through every crisis she'd worked, codes, crashes, children who didn't make it. They were steady now, which surprised her and didn't surprise her in equal measure. "What do you need from me?" she asked. A silence, brief. She had the impression it was not the question he'd expected. "Nothing," he said. "This is not your responsibility." "I didn't ask whose responsibility it was. I asked what you need." Another silence, longer. I need you to not be alone tonight, he said finally. Is there somewhere you can go? Family? A friend? She thought of her sister in Evanston. Her colleague Dana, 3 blocks over, who had a guest room and terrible taste in reality television and would ask no questions beyond red or white. Yes, she said, there's somewhere. Go there tonight. Tomorrow morning, call the number on the card. I'll have more information by then. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Okay. Naomi. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She noticed and suspected he knew she noticed. What you did on that road, he said. Most people drive past. You said that already. I know, a pause. I wanted to say it again. The line went quiet. Not dead. She could still hear the faint ambient sound of wherever he was, traffic perhaps, or wind, or the particular silence of a large, empty room. Good night, Mr. Park, she said. Good night. She called her sister. She packed a bag. She was at Dana's door by 8:30 with a bottle of wine she'd grabbed from the cabinet and a story she wasn't going to tell. She lay in the guest room that night with her phone on the pillow beside her and Dana's terrible reality television bleeding through the wall, and she thought about thresholds. About how you could stand at one and feel it clearly, the difference between before and after, between safe and something else entirely, and still, somehow, find that your feet had already carried you through. She hadn't chosen this, but she had stopped the car. And in some quiet, certain part of herself that she was only beginning to understand, she knew that wasn't an accident. She knew that when she saw that shape in the snow, something in her had already decided. She just hadn't known yet what she was deciding for. The call came at 5:43 in the morning. Not from the black card number, from the hospital. Her supervisor, Janet, voice clipped and careful in the way it got when something had happened that required careful handling. Naomi, I need you to come in. Not for your shift, there are 2 men here. Police, they say. They want to speak with whoever admitted a minor last night under the name Lee Junho. Naomi sat up in Dana's guest room, dark outside. The reality television had stopped. The house was quiet. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. She called the black card number before she'd even left the bed. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he already knew. They're at the hospital, she said. I know. No sleep in his voice, no surprise. Don't speak to them alone, I'm sending someone. I'm not going to lie to police officers. I'm not asking you to. A pause. I'm asking you to wait until my lawyer is present before you say anything at all. That's not obstruction. That's your right. She pulled on her coat. Are they actually police? A silence that lasted exactly 1 second too long. That's what I need to determine, he said. She stopped moving. Park Sejun. Go to the hospital, wait in the lobby. Don't go to your supervisor's office until my man reaches you. He'll find you. Another pause. His name is Wu, he's large. He has a scar on his chin, he's safe. How will he know me? He already knows you. She thought about Junho's warning, about paying attention, about how long before last night this had already begun. She went to the hospital. Wu was exactly as described, large enough to alter the geometry of the lobby, with a scar bisecting his chin and the particular stillness of a man who had learned patience the hard way. He was sitting in a chair near the entrance reading a newspaper that Naomi suspected was decorative. He looked up when she walked through the doors, folded the paper, and stood. Ms. Carter, his English was accented, careful. Please sit. Mr. Park is on his way. He's coming here himself. Yes. She sat. Wu sat. They waited in the particular silence of 2 people who have nothing to say to each other but are united by a common cause. Around them, the hospital moved through its early morning rhythms, shift changes, gurneys, the smell of coffee from the canteen down the hall. At 6:20, Park Sejun walked through the doors. Behind him, a woman, 30s, Korean, sharp suit, a leather portfolio under her arm, and the expression of someone who had won every argument she'd entered in the last decade. She moved like purpose given a body. Sejun crossed to Naomi, looked at her once, top to bottom, the quick assessing look she was beginning to recognize as his version of "Are you all right?" "The men upstairs," he said quietly. "One is a city detective, the other is not." She absorbed that. What is the other one? Employed by the same people who took Junho. The lobby felt suddenly, acutely smaller. "They're using a police officer," she said. "They're using the access a police officer provides." His voice was controlled fury compressed into clinical language. "It's not uncommon." He turned slightly. "This is Jae-yeon. She's my attorney. She'll be with you for every word of this conversation." Jae-yeon nodded once. Brisk, professional. "Don't volunteer anything. Answer only what's asked. If I touch your arm, stop speaking immediately." "I know how depositions work," Naomi said. Jae-yeon looked at her with something approaching respect. "Good, let's go." The men were in Janet's office. Janet herself stood against the wall with her arms folded and her mouth set in the expression she used when administration had done something she disagreed with but couldn't stop. She met Naomi's eyes briefly when they entered and gave her a look that said, "I'm sorry, and also I don't know what's happening." The detective was 50s, heavyset, with the particular exhaustion of a man who had been doing this too long and cared about it too little. His name was Rourke. He introduced himself and his colleague, Mercer, he said, private investigations, consulting with the department on a missing persons case. Mercer was younger, lean. He had the kind of face that could be forgettable if he wanted it to be, and Naomi had the clear impression that he did want it to be, usually. He looked at her with flat, assessing eyes that reminded her, uncomfortably, of Sejun's, except where Sejun's eyes were still water, Mercer's were a drain. Jae-yeon placed herself at the table with the quiet authority of someone claiming territory. Rourke asked his questions. Standard, procedural. When did you find the child? What condition was he in? Did he say anything? Did you see anyone else at the scene? Naomi answered carefully. She had found the boy. He was hypothermic. She had brought him in. She had seen a parked vehicle on the opposite shoulder. "What kind of vehicle?" Mercer asked. His first question. His voice was flat as a closed door. "Dark SUV," she said. "How many occupants?" "I couldn't say. It was dark and I was focused on the child." Jae-yeon made a small note. "The boy spoke to you," Mercer said. "In the car." He regained brief consciousness. "Yes." "What did he say?" Jae-yeon's pen stilled. Naomi held Mercer's gaze. "He said he was cold." A pause. Something moved in Mercer's eyes, not belief, not disbelief. Calculation. "That's all." He was a 7-year-old child recovering from hypothermia. "Yes, that's all." Rourke wrapped it up. Standard, cordial, the practiced warmth of someone who knew the interview was over and had already decided what to do with it. He handed her a card. She took it. Mercer stood without offering one. He looked at her for a moment too long as he buttoned his coat, the look of a man filing her away, categorizing, assigning a value to how much she knew and how much she'd cost. He left without another word. Jae-yeon walked them to the elevator. Naomi stayed in the office with Janet, who let out a breath like a valve releasing. "What was that?" Janet said. "I don't entirely know," Naomi said honestly. "That second man." "I know." "Naomi," Janet's voice dropped, "if you're in something." "I'm not in anything." She said it and almost believed it. "I found a child on the road, that's all." Janet looked at her the way nurses looked at family members who were coping by not coping, recognizing it, choosing, for now, not to push. Naomi left the office and found Sejun in the corridor. He was on the phone. He ended the call when he saw her. "Mercer," she said, "he's not investigating a missing child." "No." "He's finding out what I know." "Yes." "Which means someone above him is concerned about what I saw on that road." Sejun looked at her steadily. "Yes." She thought about the 3 men in the dark, the SUV, the way they'd stood and watched and made a phone call instead of helping a freezing boy. "They left him there deliberately," she said. It arrived not as a question, but as a conclusion she'd been assembling since 2 a.m. 2 nights ago and had only now let herself finish. They didn't just grab him and dump him. They left him there as a message. Sejun said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. A message to you, she said. Yes, one word, the most controlled word she had ever heard. Beneath it, barely, she felt the pressure of something vast and cold and absolute. Not grief, something older than grief. The particular weight carried by people who have learned that loving something makes it a weapon in other people's hands. She thought about the hand on Junho's head. She thought about 2 words in Korean. She thought about a man who told her the truth, instead of making promises. Are you going to find them? She asked quietly. He looked at her. I already have. She nodded, once. She didn't ask what that meant. She understood what that meant. Mercer will come back, she said. For me. He won't reach you. You can't watch me indefinitely. I can. He said it without drama, without possessiveness. A simple logistical fact, stated by a man for whom the logistics of watching and protecting were as natural as breathing. But I'd prefer not to do it from a distance. She looked at him. What does that mean? He held her gaze. In the flat corridor light, he looked like something architectural, structured, load-bearing, built to hold weight that would destroy lesser materials. It means, he said carefully, that I would like to know you're safe, and that I'm finding it difficult to guarantee that from across the city. It was the most personal thing he had said to her. It landed quietly, the way true things do. She should have said something practical, something about her own autonomy, her own life, the career and the apartment and the orderly existence she had built with considerable effort and maintained with more. She should have reminded herself that she was a nurse from the South Side whose mother had taught her to stop for strangers in the snow, not a woman who got involved with dangerous men and their dangerous worlds. She should have said a great number of things. I have a shift, she said. It ends at 7. He nodded. I know. Of course he did. She walked back to her ward. She checked her patients. She administered medications and changed dressings and talked a frightened father through his daughter's diagnosis with the steady, grounded calm that had always been her particular gift. All day in the back of her mind, one thought. I already have. Said without rage, without theater, with the quiet certainty of a man who existed in a world where finding people and reaching people were not separated by any meaningful distance. She had saved Junho from the cold. And now the cold was reorganizing itself, coming back in new shapes toward her. The question was no longer whether she was involved. The question was what she was willing to do about it. At 7 p.m., she walked out of the staff exit. The black Mercedes was at the curb. She got in. He was in the car. She hadn't expected that. Every other evening the back seat had been empty, just leather and silence, and the driver who didn't speak. But tonight, Sejun was there, sitting with the stillness she was beginning to understand was not detachment but discipline, a man who had trained himself to take up only the space he intended to occupy. He looked at her when she got in. She looked at him. The driver pulled away from the curb, without being told. Mercer is gone, Sejun said. He left Chicago at 4 this afternoon. Gone where? Away from here, a pause, permanently. The city moved past the tinted windows, yellow streetlights, a late January sky pressing down low and dark over the rooftops. Naomi sat with that information and let it find its proper place inside her, in the cabinet where she filed things she understood completely but would never say aloud. And the others, she asked, the men who took Junho. Handled. One word, the same word he'd used 3 days ago in a hospital corridor, and it meant now what it had meant then, a door closed, locked, the key dissolved. She didn't ask for detail. She was a nurse. She understood that some recoveries required interventions that weren't discussed in polite company, and that asking for the specifics served no one. Is it over? She asked instead. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The immediate threat is over. Men like the ones who gave those orders don't stop wanting things, but they recalibrate. They find the cost and they decide whether to keep paying it. He turned his head slightly toward the window. I've made the cost very clear. She believed him. She believed him the way she believed a bone density scan or a confirmed diagnosis, not because she wanted to, but because the evidence was unambiguous. Where are we going? She asked. Wherever you'd like. She almost said *home. The word formed ready. Her apartment, her radiator, her cold rice, her ordinary life waiting like a coat on a hook. Where is Junho? She asked instead. Something shifted in Sejun's expression, almost imperceptible. With my sister, in a secure location outside the city. He'll be there until I'm satisfied the situation is fully resolved. He's not with you. No. Is that hard? He turned to look at her fully. She had surprised him, she could see it, the small fracture in the composure, there and gone in under a second. Yes, he said. Just yes, nothing around it, no qualification or deflection. She was learning that this was how he offered truth, stripped bare, no decoration, placed in front of you like an object on a table. He asked about you, Sejun said, this afternoon when I called. Naomi looked at her hands. What did he ask? He asked if the nurse was safe. A pause. I told him yes. You weren't certain of that this morning. No, but I was certain by this afternoon. He said it the way he said everything, without arrogance, with the simple confidence of a man who had directed an outcome and watched it arrive as directed. I wanted to be able to tell him yes honestly. I don't lie to him. She thought about a child who had been taught the truth about the world, about how that was both a mercy and a wound, and how the man sitting beside her probably understood that better than most. You raised him, she said, not a question. Since he was 3, my sister, his mother, she's alive, she's safe, but she couldn't be what he needed, so I became that instead. He said it without self-pity, without martyrdom, simply, as a fact of geography. He is the most important thing in my life. That's not, he paused, choosing words with the care he gave everything. That's not something I say to many people. Why are you saying it to me? He held her gaze. Because you should understand what it means that I'm sitting in this car. He let that settle. I don't do this. I don't explain myself. I don't sit in cars with people who are not, another pause. I don't do this. The city outside had changed. They'd moved north without her noticing, the neighborhoods shifting, the streets wider, the buildings taller and further apart. Where are we going? She asked again, quietly. I have a building, he said. Private, secure. I've arranged an apartment separate from mine, your own space, your own key. My staff will not enter without your permission. It would be mine to offer and yours to refuse. She looked at him. You're not asking me to stay with you, she said carefully. No, I'm offering you safety. Those are different things. His voice was deliberate, making certain the distinction was absolute. What happened this week was my world bleeding into yours. You didn't ask for that. I can't undo it, but I can make certain it costs you nothing. A safe apartment isn't nothing. It's the least I can do. And if I say no? Then the driver takes you home. Your tire has been replaced, as I said. Wu will maintain a discreet perimeter for the next 2 weeks. You return to your life. He held her gaze. You'll be safe either way. I don't make the offer conditional. She stared at him. At this man who had run background checks and replaced tires and sent lawyers and cleared threats from the board like a chess player who planned 16 moves ahead and felt no need to announce any of them. This man who had placed his hand on a child's head with a tenderness so private, she'd felt like a trespasser witnessing it. This man who sat in cars, he said, he didn't sit in and told truths he said he didn't tell. How long? She asked. As long as the situation requires. A week, perhaps 2. She almost smiled, and after that... He was quiet for a moment. After that is a conversation for after that. She looked out the window. The building they were slowing toward was steel and glass, tall, quiet, the kind of building that didn't announce itself. A man at the entrance in a dark coat who nodded once when the Mercedes pulled up. She thought about her apartment, the radiator that clicked, the cold rice, the 8-minute drive to work, and the life she had assembled piece by careful piece from nothing much, because that was what her mother had taught her. You build with what you have. You stop for strangers in the snow. You do not drive past. She thought about a shape in a ditch, about a boy's dark eyes in a rearview mirror, about a threshold she had crossed without fully deciding to cross it, and how the crossing had felt, not like falling, not like being pulled, but like something long decided finally arriving. She thought about the most dangerous man in the city choosing, at midnight on a dark road, to let her go, because he'd already decided she was safe. She turned back to him. "I have a shift at 7 tomorrow morning," she said. "The driver will have you there by 6:50. I have plants in my apartment. They need water every 3 days." Something crossed his face. Not amusement exactly. Something warmer than that and more careful, like warmth that had learned to travel in disguise. "I'll have someone see to them. I'll write down the instructions. Your someone can't overwater the small one on the left. She's sensitive." "Understood. And I want my own key. It's already cut." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, and in the silence between them, in the space that had been built over 3 days of hospitals and dark roads and careful truths, and a child's voice saying, "Don't tell them where you found me," something settled. Not resolved, not finished. Settled the way a foundation settles, finding its level, preparing to hold weight. She opened the car door. Cold air rushed in, January still unrepentant, still sharp. She stepped out, then turned back. He was watching her through the open door. "Junho asked if I was safe," she said. "Yes." "Next time you talk to him, tell him yes, honestly." She held Sejun's gaze. "And tell him I said he still owes me for that oatmeal." For the first time since she'd known him, since the fluorescent hallway, since the dark corridor, since every careful conversation conducted in hospital waiting rooms and moving cars, Park Sejun smiled. It was brief. It was real. It changed his entire face, softened the sharp planes, made him look for just a moment like the man he might have been in a world that had been kinder to him. It disappeared in under 3 seconds. But she'd seen it. She turned and walked toward the building. The man at the entrance held the door. Behind her, she heard the Mercedes remain at the curb, not pulling away, not yet, and she understood without turning around that he was watching her go, watching until the door closed between them, because that was what he did. He watched, he calculated, he protected. Not with noise, not with declarations. With presence, with precision, with a choice made at midnight on a dark road that had quietly, irrevocably, rearranged both their lives. She crossed the lobby, took the elevator to the 14th floor, found the door with a small envelope taped to it. Inside, one key, no note, no name. She didn't need one. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was warm, already warm, heated before she arrived, because of course it had been. City lights spread out through the floor-length windows, Chicago glittering and cold and enormous below her. She stood in her coat and looked out at it for a long time. She had stopped for a boy in a snowbank. She had not known what she was stopping for. She knew now that she would never be able to fully map the shape of what she'd stepped into, the scale of it, the danger of it, the strange, dark gravity of a world organized entirely around power and loyalty, and the precise application of both. But she knew this. She had been seen by a man who saw everything, calculated everything, decided everything, and he had looked at her in her hospital scrubs on a dark road at midnight and decided she was worth watching over. Not possessing, not controlling, watching over. There was a difference. She was beginning to understand that with him, there was always a difference. She set her bag down. She took off her coat. Outside, 14 floors below, a black Mercedes sat at the curb. It didn't leave for a long time.